Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits V.O.D, countless others end up D.O.A. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Korngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. Now, as you know, usually week by week, we cover movies that never made it out of the production cycle, but sometimes we go off book, and today is one of those days. We have with us a very exciting Development Hell alumni member, Jinx, aka Jason Jenkins, and today he's brought his book, Phantom Limbs. So we're really thrilled for Jinx that he has published his first book, Phantom Limbs, which is all about everything you guys at home care about. So unmade horror sequels and remakes and IP, and it truly is like the most necessary reading for fans of this podcast. I will have the link to where you can get your own copy in the show notes, so you absolutely need to check it out afterwards. Jinx, how's it going?
Josh, thank you so much for having me back on. It has been ages. Thanks so much for the kind words about the book. I still can't quite believe that I have a book out in the world, but yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the Yap about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, you've been my partner in crime for countless episodes of Development Hell. I know the fans love you, and we have some of the, I'm going to say, best episodes of the show together, and I'm excited to talk about that a little bit now. But for the new fans, because you haven't been here in a little while, can you reintroduce yourself to the Dread Central audience?
Yes, my name is Jason Jenkins. I am a writer. I have written for, I wrote for Dread Central way back in the day. I've written for Horror Hound Magazine. I wrote for Bloody Disgusting. And Bloody Disgusting is the site where I came up with this column called Phantom Limbs, which delved into the histories of unmade horror movie sequels and remakes and, you know, the stories that they would have told. After writing about 50 articles there, I decided it might be kind of fun to turn that into a book. So now I have a book out there. And other than that, I don't think I'm too terribly interesting. Beyond those few facts, I'm afraid.
I think you're interesting because you literally are the man that wrote the book on the subject that I care most about on this planet. So I'm just grateful to have you here. And we have done such fun episodes together. I'm pretty sure some of our episodes are actually based on some of the topics in your book, or at least from your column. And I think it might be fun to do just a little bit of a nostalgic reminisce on some of, you know, the more interesting topics we've covered together. Now, if you want to jump in, you can, or do you want to hear like the ones that really stick out in my memory?
Yeah, hit me. Which ones? What is sort of the greatest hits of Jinx and Josh, or
Greatest?
Josh and Jinx?
Yeah, you both work. Okay, the one that I never stop thinking about every day, every night is Mike Flanagan's "I Know What You Did Last Summer." Now that is just classic alternative horror history at its finest.
I agree. Anything that Flanagan touches is gold, including his unmade stuff. And yeah, I think we were robbed. I Know What You Did Last Summer. His and co-writer Jeff Howard's take on that property was amazing.
Yes.
We should have gotten that movie. It's sad that we didn't. I hope that one day, someday, maybe it gets resurrected without the And,
Mm.
listeners of that episode might remember that, it's kind of I Know What You Did Last Summer in name and mantra only,
Mm-hmm.
and spirit, I would say. But
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, you could divorce it from the title and the mantra that one of the characters has, where, they say, I know what you did, I know what you did, I know what you did. And it could be a marvelous, original, horror thriller in its own right. It doesn't have to have that IP attached to it. And honestly, even back in the day before Flanagan blew up on Netflix, how any studio could have passed on this, I have no idea. But it's just a bit of a bummer. But hey, it made for a great podcast chat.
Oh, 100%. And another, maybe my favorite episode truly ever of Development Hell is we did a whole miniseries of unmade Friday the 13th films back in the day. And there was one specific one where we read the whole script and we got to talk about it. And it was just like my like horror nerd dream come true. Was it Nick Antosca?
Nick Antosca, yes.
Nick Antosca's Friday the 13th. Holy shit. That script just like blew my mind.
Yeah, he wrote such an amazing screenplay that we forgot his name momentarily, but
Sorry, guys. Sorry. Yeah.
that's only because of how blindingly brilliant the script itself was. We couldn't see anything else past it.
No, we couldn't.
Um,
It was going to be David Bruckner too, I think.
Oh, it would have been amazing. He had such a marvelous take on what that franchise could be. And what I love about it is that, unlike a lot of people who have these newer takes on Jason Voorhees, where they really sort of lean into, and probably I would too if I handled the character, but
Uh,
they really sort of lean into this bit of sympathy for the character, and they find the Boris
Tampa? Yeah.
Karloff
Oh, yeah.
Frankenstein in him, where
Yeah.
you feel a little bit bad for the monster. And what I love about Antosca's script is he just makes him a black-hearted bastard. Like,
He's
he's just
scary
pure evil and scary. Absolutely. He
and
made
fun.
Jason Voorhees scary in a way that I don't think we've ever actually seen on screen.
No. He uses that setting, that camp setting, so perfectly. Where you're walking around the lake to the other side at night, and it's just so tense, and nothing happens, no one dies, but it's just like something's gonna happen, shit's gonna hit the fan, and it does. And there was this one kill that was so brilliant, where one of our characters who we love, it's the most beautiful morning, and he's like looking over the lake, and it's the most beautiful sunny morning in summer, and he decides to jump down the water slide to go into the water, and Jason fucking rips up his machete and like cuts him in half in the water slide, and it's so gross.
Jason Voorhees is a dick in that
He's
script.
not a nice guy. No.
But it is brilliant. It's I do love the ending where all hell literally breaks loose at the end because of just what feels like just his presence. Like, he brings hell with him.
Yeah, he fucking does.
And there's an amazing, I remember you and I going through it. I want to say there's like this split screen sequence where we follow two characters walking home alone at night, or walking home
to the
alone, or
woods.
camp alone at night, almost.
Yeah.
And they're both, they're headed away from one another, which means that only one of them is going to be a victim, but we don't know which one. And that's just so brilliant.
It's so good. It's just like such a shame. This guy is some kind of genius. I don't know what he's up to right now, but hopefully everything.
I want to say he wrote that Netflix series not that long. Well, I say not that long ago. I think it was pre-pandemic.
A new cherry flavor?
Yes. Yeah, which looks fantastic. Have not seen it yet, but
Me neither.
Looks very good. We're bad fans, Josh.
Jeez Louise. Okay, so those are my two favorite, I would say, Jinx episodes. But another one that's coming to mind for some reason is the failed TV pilot for Zombieland.
Oh my god, was that our first episode?
It was early for sure. I don't know if it was first. Maybe it was. But it's such a funny one too. It was like those early days where Amazon just like made a bunch of pilots and like kind of had the audience decide which ones went to series, and it wasn't that one, and it wasn't bad.
Oh, wasn't it?
It wasn't great. I prefer it to Zombieland 2. I can tell you that.
Oh, see, Zombieland 2 is not great, but to me it's leagues better. The problem is that I honestly think Zombieland, the TV show, could have worked.
It could
have
have
been great, and you could have even done it with that same cast. You could have had the same script for the most part. The
Yeah.
problem is that you're replacing all of these iconic actors
I know. Just make new
with
characters.
just
Yeah.
make new characters. This is not the 1980s. You don't just
Yes.
recast everyone for the small screen. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
totally what they did, and that's why I think the writers, they were pretty sour about it. I remember them giving
Oh,
an
they were.
interview where they talked about the audiences hating the show out of existence, and it's like, well,
Oh.
just maybe don't blame the audience so much
Well, they
as
learned
the
their
show
lesson.
itself.
Early days.
Those guys are great, by the way. I'm a big fan of their writing, and probably the script wasn't even that bad. The problem is the recasting and the fact that they had what appeared to be $27 for a budget.
It was a low budget. But I will say, as someone that's not precious about Zombieland, I got into it. I thought it was kind of fun.
I think that's fair. That's fair.
Okay, I have some questions. Before we get into your book, I just have some questions as a fan. I'm just would like some of the inside tea. So, how did the book side of it come to be? How did it transition from this column at Bloody Disgusting to a legitimate book out in the world?
Okay, so do you want I've given the short version, the Cliff's Notes version before. Do you want the full version,
I
Josh?
want the full version.
I'll
Yeah.
give you the director's cut version
Yeah.
of the making of this book. So I pitched the column to Bloody Disgusting after having done this, what I thought was going to be a one-off piece on Bernard Rose's Unmade Candyman sequel.
Yeah.
And I was really proud of that piece. I had reached out to Bernard Rose right after the Candyman spiritual sequel, Candyman
Yeah.
4, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
The trailer had come out right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I've heard that you wanted to do a sequel back in the day. Would you be willing to talk about it? He sort of delighted me by saying yes. So it was great. And we sat down, we chatted about it. I said we sat down. We did a Zoom call or a Skype
Yeah,
even.
yeah.
And he talked at length about it, how it came to be, the story it would have told, why he didn't do it. I transcribed it. I wrote it up. I slapped it on the website. Everybody seemed to dig it, and I thought that was it. And there was this Bloody Disgusting reader who sort of took to the comments section and said something like, I wish somebody would make a book of all these unmade horror movies. I would buy it in an instant. I
Wow.
just thought nobody's going to write a book about this stuff. So, but I thought, I could do a column. And so I pitched it to John Squires at Bloody Disgusting. He went for it, and I reached out to Todd Farmer. We had a great chat on My Bloody Valentine 3D Part 2. And
Nice.
then I was kind of off to the races. I sat down and I tried to think up of as many unmade horror movie sequels and remakes as I could, and I created a master list. I started going through all these old Fangorias and looking at the terror teletypes that would announce the upcoming horror films, and I would look through them and just be like, okay, which ones didn't get made? Okay, which out of those, which ones are sequels and remakes? Because I have to stick to this damn title.
Which I like.
I love the title. It's a punny title, but let me tell you, there have been so many times, Josh, that I've run across an unmade horror movie that I got giddy about the prospect of interviewing a creative about, and then I realized it didn't fit the parameters of the damn column.
Rules are meant to be broken, Jinx.
So many. But I would love to talk with Guillermo del Toro one of these days about an unmade project. But you know what? It's not going to be at the Mountains of Madness. It's going to have to be Hellboy 3.
Oh, God, I would die. Would die to talk to that man. I hope it happens one day.
But yeah, so the column was sort of off and running. It, as I understand it, and as I was told, it was very popular. People seemed to dig it. It had a decent enough readership. Of course, it didn't hurt that it was on Bloody Disgusting, which was obviously bringing all of the eyes to the column in the first place. And so I worked on it for about, well, certainly all throughout the course of the pandemic. And then at a certain point, I want to say I was about 50 articles in, I decided that I wanted to make something more substantial out of that idea. And I pitched Bloody Disgusting on doing it as a book. Haha, reader who commented ages ago. You're right. It would make for a decent book, I would think.
Yep.
So I pitched them on the idea. I actually had cover art made up by Nathan Thomas Miller, this amazing artist who's done work for Horror Hound and Scream Factory. And I put together this big, beautiful pitch for them, and I sent it to them, and they all dug it. All of the higher ups of Bloody Disgusting. But the
Huh.
problem was that they were just about to be acquired by a company named Cinedigm, who was going to help them start producing stuff like Screambox and Terrifier and whatnot. And because they had just been acquired and because they had all this other stuff on their plate, they weren't quite in the space to get into publishing a book as well. They weren't quite into the publishing realm yet, so they kind of gave me their blessing, told me to go out into the world and see if I could get it published myself, and I didn't. I kind of I shuffled away sadly, and I was like, well, it's just I had it in my head that it would be a Bloody Disgusting book, and if it's not going to be that, I'm just not
Wait
going
a
to do
second.
anything with it.
Are there Bloody Disgusting books though?
So as I understand it, last November they announced a publishing line. I don't know when the first book is due out. That was jumping ahead a little bit. It's it was well after I sort of struck the deal with Encyclopocalypse, the publisher that I ultimately went with. But yeah, this was probably in mid 2021. And so when they kind of turned me down, I just kind of put the idea away and I didn't do anything with it. Cut to about a year later, a friend of mine had suggested doing something with Encyclopocalypse. It was this great publisher of horror movie novelizations, and they're kind of killing it right now, releasing all sorts of cool stuff. And they were just starting to get into horror nonfiction. Like I think they'd released a Preston Fossil book called Landis about sort of an unsung filmmaker, and they did the excuse me, I'm losing my voice.
Bless you.
They had done a book called Sausages about the making of Dog Soldiers by Janine Pipe, which is really cool.
Hilarious.
And so, yeah, the nonfiction stuff was kind of taking off for them too, in addition to the horror movie novelization. So I pitched them on doing a book called Gods and Monsters, The Making and Unmaking of Universal's Dark Universe. And the idea was that I would write about all of the stuff concerning and sort of swirling about all of those Dark Universe movies that sadly were never made. And
cool.
Yeah, I was really passionate about it because I love Universal Monsters. I really wanted to see where that franchise was going to go. I liked, yeah, I'm one of the few apparently, but I love the idea of taking kind of a Marvel approach to those characters and building kind of a shared universe, because you know what? The original Universal monster movies did that themselves.
I'm sorry, boo. But no, I respect you and I love you.
Frankenstein meets the Wolfman may very
I
well
saw
be
the
the
Mummy
first
2017 and it just wasn't.
It was not great. It was not great. I don't think it's nearly as bad as people believe, but
no, it's not bad. But
it was
it's worse than bad. It's like boring.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There are stretches that I think is cool, and then there's stretches that are not. But I sort of did all of this research on it. I dug up as many scripts as I could, including early drafts of The Mummy. I found a draft of the Van Helsing movie that was going to star Channing Tatum and the guy who played Dracula in Dracula Untold. And it's kind of this weird buddy cop action comedy with a supernatural version of Elizabeth Bathory as the villain. And you know what? It kind of kicked ass, Josh.
I love the sound of it.
There was a script I found, I think written by Aaron Guzikowski, called The Wolfman, that was going to star The Rock. Okay. And it really, really interesting stuff. I made a master list of 60 names of creatives who had anything to do with this franchise. I pitched the idea to Encyclopocalypse. They really dug it. And I reached out to all of those 60 people, and none of them got back to me.
No, God.
I take that back. I take that back. One person got in touch with me.
Angelina Jolie.
She was one of the people that I would have even been cool with not speaking with the actors. When I reached out to their reps, did I really think that Tom Cruise was going to get back to me? No. Did I think Angelina Jolie's or Javier Bardem's people were going to get back to me? Probably not.
No.
But all of the writers and some of the directors who were lined up and stuff, like, guys, come on.
Sure.
Like, and no, it just straight up didn't freaking happen. But one guy, Gary Shore, the guy who directed Dracula Untold. He would have been the beginning of it all, because his film was originally created to be a standalone.
Yeah.
And then he had to sort of alter his film to allow it to better fit into this burgeoning universe.
Oh, I didn't know
Kind of
that they were
because,
fitting him into Dark Universe.
yes, so it was kind of like retroactively dragging Dracula Untold into it. So he had to change his film, and then after his compromised film came out,
Yeah.
they decide, and maybe it underperformed. I thought it did kind of well, but apparently not blockbustery like they wanted. So they then decided, well, no, it's not going to be a part of the Dark Universe. The Mummy is going to be our big kickoff. And, such a shitty thing to do.
Yeah.
So he was kind enough to at least respond to my my email, and he said, you know what? He was like, thank you so much, but I don't know that I'm ever going to talk about that movie. He's like, it's too painful. And I was like, I understand. So after literally nobody else got back in touch with me, I realized, I was like, oh, this book is deader than a damn doornail. And I sort of set it aside. But I was in love with the idea of writing a book. So I got back to Encyclopocalypse, and I was like, hey, so that book's dead, but I used to write this column called Phantom Limbs, and here's some cover art I made up for it, and would you want to do it instead? And they were like, sure. So I kind of focused on doing that instead. And because Bloody Disgusting had sort of paid me for all of the articles that I'd written for them, I no longer had the right to publish them. So, which is a good thing in a way, because it forced me to get back out there and find 25 new as
topics.
it were, stories to tell. And so that's what I did. And I spent probably about 7 months working on the book beginning to end. And now it's done and out there in the world. And I'm super excited about it. I got to do a signing at Dark Delicacies. I'd always wanted to just visit Dark Delicacies. And the fact that I got to do that as an author, signing alongside so many creatives that were kind enough to lend their time and to do an interview with me about their own unmade projects, like it was a dream come true. It was absolutely amazing.
It's really amazing. I'm so proud of you. Like, that really is like horror celebrity caliber once you're at Dark Delicacies.
I felt like such an imposter there, but I set that part of myself aside, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna enjoy this. So,
and I saw that recently at the beginning of April that the book actually hit #1 on Amazon's horror charts. So it seems to me like your book's doing quite well.
I hope people are digging it. Certainly seems like a lot of people are buying it, which is amazing. I just want to keep spreading the word about it, because even more so than just, and this, Josh, from running this this podcast, I'm sure when you love this sort of thing, like you just want to share it with as many people as possible. Do I want a bunch of people to buy a book that I wrote? Well, sure. But more than that, I want more fellow fans to pick it up so that they can know about the initial version of Resident Evil that never got made, so that they know how Robin Hardy's Wicker Man trilogy was going to wrap up, so they know where Chrome Skull was going to wind up at the end of the Laid to Rest trilogy that we will sadly never get. Like, I just want to help share all of this stuff. That sounds weirdly altruistic. It's not. It's actually,
I understand.
It's
100% understand that, Jinx. It's the most interesting thing in the world, the idea of all of this alternate horror history, what could have been, and the human stories about why it didn't happen. Could there be a more interesting topic in this world? There's no way.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. You and I have done so many podcasts together, and I've written so many articles for Bloody Disgusting. I did this book and whatnot, but it was on a recent podcast appearance. I was kind of forced to consider why I enjoy this sort of thing so much. And it's not simply like sitting down and being like, ooh, tell me a story, that I haven't heard before. Like, there is, I think every reader, any enthusiastic reader who picks up a book of any sort, when you read a novel, that movie theater screen in your mind flickers to life in the back of your mind, and you sort of imagine what the ideal version of the book that you're reading would look like. You cast it yourself. You know what it looks like. It's why when we read the book first, the movies rarely live up to it because we've already made the perfect version for ourselves. It's weirdly collaborative in that way. And speaking with a creative, like a great writer or a great director who didn't get to make a movie, and hearing about the histories of them, all of that is fantastic. But then hearing bits and pieces, or even getting to read the script or hearing lengthy summaries about them, we get to imagine alongside these creatives like what that movie could have been, and in a way that becomes weirdly collaborative too.
It's mystical.
I
It
know.
is.
I maybe sure. I look, like Mike Flanagan, I think, is one of the best storytellers out there right now. His version of Halloran, it would have been an amazing movie, I think, but sadly, all that exists of it is a 7-page treatment, which I synopsized for the chapter that I wrote on it. And so when reading it, I tried to imagine what it would look like, what it would sound like, what the performances would be like, all based upon what Mike Flanagan has done before. And in my mind, I have a pretty damn good idea of what that movie would have been. And you know what? We missed out because it would have been amazing.
I believe it. And I'm going to make you talk a little bit more about that specific project today. But I have to ask, because for me, there is an answer. It was for someone that, like me, is obsessed with horror films trapped in development hell. Was there a specific project that brought you into this world? Was there one? Was there like one sort of like one blue whale that you just like couldn't let go of, and that's sort of what wrapped you into all this?
Yes, I think it was kind of a 1-2 punch. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I had just discovered Fangoria. Well, that's not true. I discovered Fangoria probably at around age 10. I picked up the issue with Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead on the cover, the one with the bright orange border. I'll remember it forever. And I picked up that issue, and it scared the living shit out of 10-year-old me. And I did not go back to Fangoria until I was about 14 or 15. And it was issue number 149. And at around that time, I don't know how many issues past that it was, but it might have been that very issue. There was this mention of a Halloween 6 that never got made, and that was the Tarantino Scott Spiegel version. But then they also mentioned that the Halloween 6 that we did get had a completely different version where the final third was different. And of course, it was out there on the bootleg market, the black market, with that producer's cut on like a smeary 3rd or 4th generation VHS. And just these two ideas put together, that there was a movie that didn't get made, or there wasn't a movie released, or there was a movie. It was unthinkable to me in like those pre-internet days, this notion that you could develop a movie and it simply wouldn't get made at some point. That was a huge idea for young me at the time. And then so many issues past that, there was this great 2-issue article, this 2-parter with Peter Jackson talking about the Frighteners. And at some point in that article, he touched on his earlier career doing stuff like Meet the Feebles and
I know where you're going.
Bad Taste and whatnot. And of course, at a certain point, he mentioned that he even took a whack at working on a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. It would have been part 6. And he talked a little bit about what the story would have been. And it sounded so fucking cool to me.
Yeah.
And that's really sort of what lit the fire. It's like this just seeking out these stories of movies that didn't get made. At around that time, I was a huge fan of, still am, a huge fan of Clive Barker. As much as I love Hellraiser, which I think is brilliant and iconic, and as much as I love Nightbreed, which is huge to me in my development as a horror fan, I think his best film is Lord of Illusions. And they were going to continue that franchise at a certain point with a sequel called Vipex. And I remember it being announced, and I remember waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it. And Josh, 27 years later, I got to tell you, I'm still kind of waiting for it.
Yeah, that's what happens.
But yeah, so just this, it wasn't just one movie, I don't suppose, but it was multiple just hitting in my teens that sort of, I don't know, it was an itch, this idea of wanting to find out more about these movies
Yeah.
beyond the occasional mention that we would get. It-
Jinx, you know what? We are two of a kind, truly.
You know what? I never asked. What's yours?
So mine was when I was in 7th grade. I was not a video game kid, but for some reason I discovered this horror game, which was a sort of gothic horror adaptation of Alice in Wonderland called American McGee's Alice.
Yes.
And it blew me away. I became immediately obsessed with it. And at the time, it was announced that Wes Craven was going to make a film adaptation. And
Was
I
it?
just thought, holy McFuck. Like, holy fuck. The years went by. I believe that's when he got sick. And so the project left Craven and went to Marcus Nispel, of all people. And it was going to star Sarah Michelle Gellar.
I was going to ask, yes, Sarah Michelle Gellar. I remember her being attached to it.
Yeah. And so I was so obsessed with it, obsessed with this for like 10 years of my childhood. And eventually it just never happened. And I thought, interesting. I'm obsessed with this as a concept. And that's how I got here.
No, that's a great one. And I believe you did an episode on it a while
I
back,
have,
right?
yeah.
No, that is great.
Hilarious. Okay, I have to be honest with you. I'm very, very curious about cracking open Phantom Limbs and maybe taking a tease from some of the more interesting topics within. Would that be okay with you?
Sure. Which ones would you like to talk about? Hit me.
Okay, so I'm definitely interested in talking about at least one of the Hellraiser iterations. Can you let me know, like, what different Hellraiser projects do you tackle?
Okay, so there's not one. There are, in fact, 2 chapters devoted to the Hellraiser franchise. One is about the Todd Farmer, Patrick Lussier iteration that would have been.
We love those guys.
Yes, yeah, and their take on it would have been really interesting, where they grafted sort of like Clive Barker's sort of the mythology that he had created and that everyone knows, with their more sort of blockbustery action film sensibilities. They described it, I believe, as Hellraiser meets Jack Bauer in National Treasure. And
okay,
if that doesn't get listeners hard, I don't know.
I am hard. What era? What year was all this?
This would have been around, I want to say it was right after Drive Angry. The idea, I think, is that they would have done it in 3D because it was post it was post My Bloody Valentine. It was post Drive Angry. So
they were great at 3D horror.
Yes, they were. I think Lussier is one of the best shooters of 3D that I've seen in a theater. So
yes, totally.
Weirdly enough, I think Paul W.S. Anderson doesn't get enough credit for being able to shoot 3D incredibly well too. So I would say it's probably honestly those 2 guys and Jim Cameron. So they're in great company, I think. So but there was that, and then I think the other Hellraiser I tackled. What am I saying? I'm certain that the other Hellraiser I tackled was the one written by. It was a pitch written by Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski, a gentleman who would go on to actually write a completely different Hellraiser, the one that we got for Hulu last year. And their own take on Hellraiser a decade ago was eventually rewritten as an original script called The Night House, which is amazing. So
and I've heard that, and I've always wondered how that could be, because while I do see glimpses of that sort of horror there, it's such a different story.
Okay, so this isn't going to completely cover it, but this will get you halfway there. Imagine you've seen The Night House.
Yeah.
Imagine Rebecca Hall is a fusion of Kirsty and Julia. And imagine the husband that disappeared is Frank, and she just really wants Frank back. And she doesn't, she starts learning things about her husband that she didn't, know, and she kind of wishes she hadn't, but she's put in a position where she could bring her husband back if she does some morally reprehensible things, and that kind of changes her as a person, and you go from there. And yeah, it's real. I think it would have been fantastic. And what's cool is So in Barker's original film, you have Julia and Kirsty, and I think they did kind of a fusion of those names so that the lead is Julie
Mm.
in their treatment. And then, of course, Frank would have been the guy who went missing, the husband. And yeah, I think it would have been really amazing. I think it sounded like when they were describing it's like A24 presents Hellraiser, and who the hell wouldn't want to see that, you know?
I'm dying for that. I would love to see not related to any of this, but just like a Julia film, like a reboot of Julia Hellraiser, because I don't think we're done with her.
No, you know what? I mean, if you were going to start it again, that's where you should focus because that was the original intent that Julia would be the villain of the trilogy. And I think there is a way. One, you would have to get rid of Pinhead and you would have to keep the Cenobites
You
interesting.
can't do that though. You just can't.
I think you can. I think you can.
No, fans are gonna be like angry.
They'll be fine. No,
Alright.
I love that idea though, Josh. I think a Julia trilogy would be
I
absolutely
love
incredible.
her. I wonder where that actress is, so she could come back.
Claire Higgins, she's still
Yeah.
alive, still acting. The last thing I saw her in was God, it was probably about a decade ago. She played a kind of sort of villain in a couple of
Mm,
Doctor Who episodes.
cool. Perfect, actually.
So
Well, that's fascinating. These are two Hellraiser projects that I think could have really worked. Although, obviously, one is leaning into the art house world where, Clive Barker does live. And then the other is a little bit more, I guess, action packed, a little bit more fast paced, but that's okay too.
yeah, I love that the idea lends itself to all of these different, wildly different sort of iterations. And I think there's room for both to exist. I think Hellraiser should be a
Oh,
far
yeah.
bigger franchise than it is, and this is
Pick up the pace, guys.
down
Yeah.
purely to mismanagement for decades by the fucking Weinsteins. But
Can I be honest with you? I didn't feel the fantasy of the Hulu film. It didn't land for me personally.
what I loved about the Hulu movie, I thought the performances were great. I thought it was beautiful. The thing that I really dug about it is that it took this very specific horror imagery that Barker had created. And Barker's stuff is very grounded in the kind of Christian concept of hell, albeit his own version of
Mm-hmm.
which is odd. And I'm really including like the first couple of sequels in that statement because if you take just the first movie, it's not quite that. It becomes that in the later films.
Yeah.
But what I love about the Hulu film that Collins and Piotrowski wrote is that one, you have a story that's not remaking anything that's come before. In fact, it might
Mhm.
very well be set in the same universe. Maybe there are multiple pinheads. Maybe it's like a
Sure.
designation. You don't know. But what I really love about it is that it translates Barker's ideas. It pulls them out of that sort of that punk feel that those movies have.
I
And
feel
it
like there were. Oh, okay. I'll let you finish.
no, and it delivers them into something that feels more cosmic. It feels like
Okay.
cosmic horror to me, and I love that.
Yeah, sure. There was some. Yes, I can hear that. But for me, Hellraiser is so entrenched in uh pleasure and sexuality and the relationship between pain and pleasure and queerness and fetish and just sex, and it was so neutered, this new one. There was just nothing hot about it, and I just think Hellraiser has to kind of be hot. There needs to be something dangerous and sexy about it because of that pleasure pain dichotomy, and that just wasn't there. And where I loved what they did with Pinhead, but I feel like she was always at least 30 like yards away, just kind of waving in the background, like not really doing anything.
I loved that performance. I thought it was a really neat take on the character. I understand what you're saying about the sexuality. It seemed like rather than they stumbled and fell and made a mistake and didn't bring that across when they should have. It felt like a deliberate choice to keep Not to
It
remove
was
the
a deliberate choice.
sexuality. I mean, there are a couple of, sex scenes in it, but there's something like observant about it. Like there's a
Mhm.
coldness to it. It's like Cronenberg shooting a sex scene,
Well, there was
which felt
coldness of the
intentional.
sex in the first film was excruciating, and it was great.
Yeah, well,
But
the,
okay,
the
you know
the
what?
first sex scene will always ick me out because it starts as a rape. Like it's
With Julia,
yeah.
I don't recall so much, but I just recall her being such a sexual character in such a scary way that I was like, yeah, this is to me what Hellraiser is. It's like queer, like basement fetish freakiness, and that's what draws me to it. But we could talk about this for truly 1,000 years. Um, what I'm dying to pick your brains on a little bit is we talked earlier about Mike Flanagan's A Halloran sort of prequel, and I know that this was a topic that you covered in Phantom Limbs, and I would love to learn a little more about that treatment.
Sure, absolutely. So I had read somewhere that if Doctor Sleep had been successful, that we were due to get a Halloran spinoff, and sadly it never happened. And I always wanted to learn more about it, and when I started up Phantom Limbs, Mike Flanagan was one of the first people that I reached out to. And of course, for anyone who's followed his career, Mike Flanagan is a super busy man. um
Yeah.
Understandably so. And so I didn't get in touch with him initially. I did for the book. He was just a wonderful guy, like super nice. He delved into the history of the project and why it fell apart. He shared the treatment for Halloran with me so I could synopsize it for the book. And basically, what had happened when he was drafted to do Doctor Sleep, which was the sequel to The Shining. It's an adaptation of King's sequel novel, but I'm sure most horror fans worth their salt know that Stephen King is not super enamored with Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining.
Mhm.
And what Flanagan did brilliantly with his movie was that he managed to faithfully adapt King's novel, but also apply the iconography from the Stanley Kubrick movie that everyone is aware of. And he fused both Kubrick and King into one beautiful movie. Now, when I saw the movie in theaters, I thought it was a little
Snoozy.
lacking. I that was probably my most anticipated movie that year, and when I watched it, I just kind of shrugged walking in. I was like, yeah, the performances were great, it was well made, and so on and so forth, but
It was
just
boring.
it was missing something essential, and I couldn't put my finger on what. And then the director's cut hits disc, and being a dutiful fan, I picked it up and I told myself I'd give it one more shot. And it had been shorn of 30 minutes. You cut the right 30 seconds out of a movie, you can handicap it.
Mhm.
30 minutes had absolutely crippled this film because that director's cut elevated what I thought was kind of a miss of a movie into the realms of being a fucking masterpiece. I literally, honestly, hand on heart believe that Mike Flanagan's director's cut of Doctor Sleep can stand comfortably beside Stanley Kubrick's original film. I think it's
Yeah.
brilliant. Just a marvelous, marvelous film. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see the good version of the movie. Warner Brothers decided they wanted to squeeze in a few more showings every day at the theaters they released it to. So they cut a half a fucking hour out of the film.
Wow, because of that, really?
I mean, that's generally the reason why you would cut that, cut that kind of footage out of a movie and hamper it. Otherwise we would have, frequently we would probably have like 3 and 4 hour director's cuts of certain films. But you know
Mhm.
what? If you do that, you're only going to have like 2 or 3 showings a day at most movie theaters. And if you want to sell more tickets, you got to show it daylight to dark. So they chopped 30 minutes out of it. The movie went into theaters. Word of mouth wasn't great, apparently, based on this sort of truncated version. And as a result, the film kind of it deeply underperformed.
Yeah.
The plan, if it had been a success, was that it was going to kick off a brand new Shining verse. Warner Brothers was going to make it its new big franchise. There was not only going to be a Halloran, there was also going to be a prequel movie called The Overlook Hotel, based upon, and if people actually go to the Phantom Limbs column at Bloody Disgusting, I did an article on the original Glenn Mazzara screenplay for a Shining prequel called The Overlook Hotel.
I have to pause you because we also did an episode of Development Hell on that topic.
Yes, indeed. And it was heartbreaking to hear that. Okay, so the reason that movie didn't get made was because Dr. Sleep came out and they decided they were going to focus on developing that as a film instead. That's why The Overlook Hotel died. When they started developing Dr. Sleep, they were working with Flanagan on building out this new Shining verse. And he pitched them the idea of doing Halloran, and they pitched him on doing The Overlook Hotel and gave him Glenn Mazzara's script, and he really dug it, and he was going to do a rewrite, because as he noted in our interview together, he was like, that's how I process a story, is like I have to rewrite it so I know what it is and so I can direct it. But he was going to do not one, but two Shining spinoffs. There was going to be Halloran, there was going to be The Overlook Hotel, and then, if those had done well, in a perfect world, we would have gotten a Dr. Sleep sequel about Abra Stone, which would have been great. And we would have gotten more and more. Maybe we would have eventually gotten a prequel movie about, Grady and the twin girls in The Shining.
Oh,
Who
I
knows?
love that. Or what's her name? The tragic lady in the bathtub.
Yes, her too. Well, she's kind of accounted for in The Overlook Hotel a bit, but
yeah, and she's in Dr. Sleep too.
Yes, yeah. So, that was the plan. This was not going to be a one-off. This was going to create a series of films based upon that property, and it would have been amazing. And, so what Halloran would have done, it would have taken sort of the character that we know from The Shining and a handful of other King stories, including a brief appearance in It. And it was going to build out a backstory for him that begins with him as a child. Growing up, his grandmother teaches him exactly what The Shining is and how to handle it, how to lock ghosts away, because he has an abusive grandfather who had died, who is currently haunting him. And so he learns how to basically tackle ghosts and lock them away in his mind, which is an ability that he teaches Danny Torrance eventually in Dr. Sleep. So we would follow him from the time that he is a boy to the time that he's a young man fighting in the war. And he uses his natural abilities, like The Shining, to sort of get him out of a lot of scrapes. And there's kind of like a survivor's guilt to that, where these soldiers are dying around him and he can't do anything about it, but he can save himself. Which kind of creates like a really interesting young hero there, where he's kind of tortured by his tortured by the thing that makes him special. He would eventually come back home, and there would have been, I guess, a sequence where he was in Derry, and he runs afoul of, okay, and I should say this, Flanagan told me in the interview that he wanted it to be a being in Derry, and we would understand that it has a connection to Pennywise, and that it is a version of Pennywise, but he didn't necessarily want to do anything too on the nose and have it be the clown. The thing is that It had just come out at around this time, both parts 1 and part 2. They were both big hits, and he, I think it's even noted that it's going to be Pennywise in the treatment, and he said that he believed that Warner Brothers would have insisted that they include Pennywise in that sequence. So you would have had young Dick Halloran facing off, or at least running afoul of, one imagines
It wouldn't make sense.
the new version of Pennywise. I would have loved it if they could have tied those two together.
Okay, yeah, I would have too.
And I think Flanagan would have made it work too, is the thing. That's what's exciting about it. Like, there's so many people who could fumble that. I don't imagine Flanagan would,
Can I give you my dream Mike Flanagan extension of The Shining?
Yeah, hit me.
So I'm a big fan of his The Haunting series on Netflix. So Haunting
Oh, I
Hill
know
House,
where you're
Haunting
going with
Hill
this. Yes.
Yes. So I would love a third and final season, The Haunting of the Overlook Hotel.
Well, sadly, we're never going to get that because, and he
Oh,
pointed this out in our interview, because later when he, okay, I'm going to put a pin in that. Remind me about Netflix. But
okay.
so to wrap up what the story would have been, the bulk of the Halloran script was going to find him in his probably his 20s or early 30s. He would have relocated to New Orleans, married, he has a child. They wind up dying. He becomes an alcoholic, to drown away the pain. And he eventually sort of runs afoul of a serial killer whose MO is basically charted across multiple people. It turns out that there is a creature who can hop bodies. And in the police force, there are characters known as divers who can get into the minds of like recently deceased victims and, to better kind of suss out who killed them. And
Are you
so
jumping into The Outsider?
uh
Sorry.
no, you're good. So yeah, I could see how you could kind of like, that's the thing with King, is like so many concepts are sort of like woven throughout all of his various works. That's a neat idea. But yeah, no, Halloran is sort of drawn into that fold, and he, puts him on a collision course with this supernatural creature. Um, and, much like I think when he was told when he was a boy, by his grandmother about the various types of evil out in the world, he will eventually confront it in, the Overlook Hotel. The True Knot from Dr. Sleep is another type of evil. And then here in New Orleans, with him as a young man, he confronts yet another type of evil, and that's this body hopping demon. He eventually falls for a woman, and as Flanagan noted, by the time you get to the final act, she sadly would die. It's kind of like a Pyrrhic victory where Halloran wins the war, as it were. Or rather, he wins the battle, but he loses the war. He stops the villain, but he loses the woman that he loves. And it kind of breaks him. And he turns in his badge and his gun, and he gets as far away from New Orleans as he can think. And he winds up in Colorado at a hotel, and he decides to go back to his first love, which is cooking. And so he becomes the chef at the Overlook Hotel. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that the film would have been bookended with the older Halloran as an older man, sort of like walking the hotel. The hotel is being closed up for the winter. They're expecting their new caretaker. And he kind of has a run-in with the woman in 237. And that's what kicks off this series of flashbacks that fill us in on what his life would have been.
Just scary.
At the end, we would have gone back to that. He shrugs it off, and he goes to greet the new caretaker. And of course, we're expecting it to be Jack Torrance and Danny. In fact, it's Grady and the two twin girls. And so, it would have been that last little great twist. And, as Flanagan noted, like, he probably wouldn't have done much more with the Halloran character at that point if the Shining verse had continued, because all of the major beats of that character's life would have been told. But as a one-off, as a Halloran-centric story that turns him into the hero, like, I think this would have been one amazing movie. And it sadly never happened because, as he noted, Warner Brothers was expecting this to be a huge hit, even as they were chopping 30 minutes out of it. And it's opening weekend, he said they knew by that Sunday that it wasn't meant to be. Actually, earlier in that, in fact, it's, God, in a kind of heartbreaking story that he tells in our chat, he said that he had taken about a dozen people to the ArcLight Friday night, like during its opening, hoping, one imagines, that it would be a packed audience, and they were practically the only ones in there. And he just kind of looked around at everyone. He's like, well, we're not making Halloran. And sure enough, by that Tuesday, both projects, both that and the Overlook Hotel, kind of got shot in the head, and he was informed that there was to be no Shining verse after that. And so that's kind of that. And I asked him, I was like, look, is there any chance that this could still, work as, maybe in another medium? Could there be a Halloran TV show on Max or something like that? And he said, yeah, there absolutely could be, but it would have to be without him, because once he left Netflix, he is now signed to an exclusive deal with Amazon, which is hopefully, fingers crossed, where he will get to make The Dark Tower. which I
God,
think would
yes.
be absolutely amazing. And he said even, if he gets to do the Dark Tower, that's maybe the spot where he could bring in Danny Torrance. He could bring in Halloran. He could bring in some of these characters from that universe, because apparently he's on very friendly terms with Warner Brothers. And he said he bet that if he went to them and asked them to use some characters, that they would probably be okay with that. So maybe, fingers crossed, that story, or at least his version of that story, isn't over yet. But the prospect of getting a Halloran feature film at this point is pretty much nada.
And this guy is busy. He just potentially is signing on for the Exorcist films, unfortunately. So we'll see.
Yeah, you know what?
I hope he doesn't.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think Mike Flanagan seems to be the type of storyteller to sign on to something just for the money. So if he signs on to do an Exorcist film,
He'll take it seriously.
I believe that means that he sees something in that franchise worth visiting, and maybe he imagines a story worth telling. I got to tell you, after the last Exorcist movie, I was pretty much done with the franchise, and then as soon as they announced Flanagan was doing it, it's like, well, fuck it, I guess I'm back in.
No, I was so sad because I just want my baby to focus on the Dark Tower.
I mean, maybe you know what? I don't know what's happening there. I don't know why we haven't gotten the announcement. I don't know why Amazon isn't pulling the trigger on it. Who knows? But in the meantime, Flanagan's got to make stuff. So
Ugh. Anything but The Exorcist. I just couldn't be less interested in that franchise. But I'm happy for him.
I think when you look at something like Midnight Mass, he has. That's a really interesting struggle with just what he had to say about faith and maybe the good things about it, and maybe the not so great things about organized religion, as it were. And so
I hear that.
having a storyteller that's sort of rooted in that place tackling something like The Exorcist, I think could yield some an interesting story.
I mean, Blumhouse, stop. I have to say, there is one other topic covered in Phantom Limbs that I'm dying to sort of investigate with you while you're here.
Sure.
And I know that you talk a little bit about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. You have a project in there that was before Texas Chainsaw 3D, right?
Not in the book. So when I was writing a Bloody Disgusting, I actually had a second column called Larval Ink. I do love my punny titles, folks. And that was all about the original iterations of certain scripts that were wildly changed by the time they reached the screen. And I had spoken for that column with a pair of writers named Adam Marcus and Deborah Sullivan, who, by the way, I interviewed for a completely different project for the book called The Plantation, which is a remake of I Walked with a Zombie that sounds incredible. And they talked about their script called Leatherface, which eventually became Texas Chainsaw 3D. And the broad strokes of that movie kind of followed their script. It was, the devil was in the details. They wrote an incredible screenplay that, if adapted faithfully, shot faithfully, it would have made for an amazing movie. But of course, somebody got the bright idea that having a FaceTime sequence on an iPhone in a movie that was meant to be set in 1993 would be great. So, we have Alexander Daddario essentially playing what should have been a 40-year-old character instead of a 19-year-old character. I just cannot get over that for the life of me. Anyway, that project had originated with a completely different script from a writer named Steven Susko, who had developed the project with James Wan and Toby Hooper, also to be called Leatherface, which was intended to be a trilogy set immediately after the events of the first film. James Wan was going to direct the first installment, Toby Hooper the second. Apparently, Neill Marshall was in talks for the third. It was going to be shot on 16 millimeter. It would have been amazing. And, the people who eventually gave us Texas Chainsaw 3D found a way to fuck that up. So we did get Texas Chainsaw 3D, and I wrote about those two projects that eventually became Texas Chainsaw 3D for the column. Somehow, some way, I stumbled across. I'll tell you exactly how it happened. I'm friends with a writer on Twitter named Scott Malam. He wrote Darren Lynn Bousman's Mother's Day, which is a great super intense thriller. If you haven't seen it, it's incredible. Rebecca de Mornay is fucking terrifying in it. And I had reached out to him and I was like, hey, I have this column. It's becoming a book. Would you have any projects that would have been remakes or sequels that didn't happen for whatever reason? And he got back to me and he was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it would count, but I did write a sequel to Texas Chainsaw 3D. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Say again? And so he sent me the script. I read it. And Josh, I think Texas Chainsaw 3D is kind of trashy fun in points, but I just can't get beyond some of its bigger sins. I think it's easily the worst in the franchise. His script for Texas Chainsaw 3D, or rather Texas Chainsaw 2, is so damn good. It made me like Texas Chainsaw 3D a little more.
Okay, tell me about it.
Okay, so it picks up right after the end of the previous film. Now, are we to assume that listeners out there are familiar with Texas Chainsaw 3D?
Yes.
Good. Okay, because if you're not, folks, I really don't want to recap it. Thanks so much.
Do your thing, cuz.
Yeah, that.
She has an Emmy nomination now. Respect her name.
I think she is a really good actor. I do, and I think she did her best with the role in that film.
Yeah.
I really do. But yeah, no. So that movie ended with Alexandra Daddario's character Heather, who is revealed as the cousin because of Leatherface, and she is now kind of his caretaker. She gets access to.
Oh, cool. Sorry.
No, you're good. She gets access to the considerable wealth of the Carson family oil derricks, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Which, as it's told to her in the second script at one point, she makes more money when she sleeps at night than most people make in a lifetime.
Jealous.
So she gets that, but the caveat that her grandmother left her with is that she has to watch over her murderous kin and basically keep him in line. So she elects to do that because she has no other family left. And so, that's where the story begins. Or actually, that's not true because the story actually opens with a pair of crazy people, Lenny and Rhonda. Think Natural Born Killers, but on meth.
Okay.
Lenny is described as a long-haired freak, tattooed body, the embodiment of Psycho. Rhonda is, and I quote, porn star reject with a dive bar education.
They sound hot and cool.
Yeah, well, Lenny was meant to be played by Bill Moseley, who was in 3D as a completely different character. So these two are in a vehicle that they have stolen from a young mother and her child, who are still held captive in the vehicle. And they're basically on the run. They flee into these, kind of a wooded area. They're going to murder the mother and child, except she winds up getting away, racing through the woods with these crazy people on her heels. And she finds herself at the doorstep of the Carson mansion. And who opens the door but Heather? So Heather sees what's going on. She sees this bloodied mother and her child. She sees these two psychos racing in the distance after them. She kind of immediately gets it. She invites the mother in, and she goes to Leatherface's door, which is down these stairs. It's a big, heavy door where she locks him in each night. She throws open the door and tells him, dinner, basically. So, as you might imagine...
Did you get her to get the mom?
No. The psychos. And so the psychos come in. Leatherface brutally kills Lenny. He turns on Rhonda, so you imagine he's going to kill her as well. We cut to Heather telling the mother and child, look, you're welcome. I saved your life, but make certain you never tell anyone about this. And so she kind of puts the fear of God into them, just with the insinuation that if she doesn't, maybe she'll send her pet after them as well. So off they go.
Cool.
Yeah, and so
I just want to say that it's kind of cool that you're seeing them as evil, but you're seeing them kind of save the cat a little bit too. It's interesting.
Oh, 100%. And that's definitely where the characters live in this story, where there is a real danger to them, but they're also presented as kind of the de facto heroes because there are worse people out there. And I kind of love that. in a way. So anyway, we catch up the next day. Heather is getting used to her new life as kind of like the last scion of this big oil fortune. She has Richard Reilly's character from the previous film sort of filling her in as her lawyer. His name's Farnsworth. And, there's a neat moment where she writes him a check that totals a single night's profits, which kind of stuns him, and she does it because, he's done solid by her and her family.
Mhm.
And so eventually, Deputy Carl, who is the Scott Eastwood character from the previous film, who was the son of the evil Mayor Burt. He was kind of the bad guy who led the vigilante team against the Sawyers and killed her entire family back during the events of the 74 film. He is the one who Leatherface kills after Heather intones "Do Your Thing, Cuz." So Mayor Burt, his son Deputy Carl, as it turns out, he was kind of acting on his father's orders. If you remember the previous film, he disappears before the climax. He never did anything too objectionable other
Okay.
than lock up a woman that he thinks is probably a criminal due to what his dad had told her about her. So the more he finds out about his father when he's looking for him, because he did just up and disappear. Nobody knows that he was sort of put through the grinder by Leatherface. He finds out that his dad maybe wasn't the best of guys. And so he sort of seeks out Heather to make amends. And there's kind of like this venomous back and forth between the two, but there's also kind of an attraction. And
Okay.
Leatherface kind of clocks that. He's none too happy about it. But yeah, so there's this kind of like burgeoning Romeo and Juliet thing happening because
That's so weird.
yeah, they're
Okay.
both from these clans that are responsible for killing one another, and yet they just kind of dig one another and they want to be with one another, which is
So weird. I
interesting.
love it.
And it drives Leatherface wild. In fact, Leatherface, who has been secretly digging a tunnel out of his holding area so he can slip out at night, he sneaks around the house and watches through the window as Carl and Heather have sex. And then he goes back into his dungeon and opens this closet area or whatever. And there is Rhonda, one of the maniacs from the opening, and she's tied up. And he kind of
Oh, no.
throws her on the all fours
Uh-oh.
and tries to replicate what he saw Carl and Heather doing. The thing is, because Rhonda's batshit crazy, it doesn't play like a rape scene like she's into it because
Oh, no. That's wild.
yeah, it's and it's very delicately written in the script, and Scott Malone
Is
definitely
it Bride of Leatherface vibes?
kind
Okay.
of, yeah.
I'd watch.
But the big villain of the piece, weirdly enough, is another Hartman, Duke Hartman, who is the mayor's brother. It's Carl's uncle. He's basically presented in this epic fashion as the ultimate badass. Like he appears in a Dodge Ram. He's roaring down a Texas highway. He's got sunglasses, a big hat decorated with bullets and bones. He's got a black ring with a gold H at its center. You know,
Nice.
and he basically wants to know why his brother isn't answering his phone calls. He wants to know what happened to him. He shows up and pretty much figures out that his brother has been disappeared by somebody, and he is hell-bent on finding out who.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this character who, by the way, was written to be played by Tom Berenger, who I think would have done a great job playing him.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have a group of women in the town who, well, they're kind of the popular mean girls. One of them has a crush on Carl, which means they hate Heather, and they try fucking her up at one point, and they try kind of vandalizing the house late one night when Heather is gone, and they don't realize that Leatherface is there and is a thing. And Leatherface slaughters them, of course. Eventually, it all sort of dovetails, like all these various threads, into a big climax at the end, where Duke versus Leatherface in the basement. You have Rhonda show up to try and help. You have Deputy Carl who arrives, who has basically just found out a big family secret. It turns out that his father had an affair with one of the Sawyer clan. In fact, he had an affair with Heather's mother. In fact, Heather and Carl, who have been fucking for the last half of this film,
Siblings.
are brother and sister.
Classic Texas.
Yeah. So it ends with Carl shooting down Rhonda, thinking she's a threat to everybody. Leatherface kills Carl as a result.
Because that's his wife.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like eye for an eye, as it's noted in the script. And then he's about to kill Bert, and Heather screams at him, "No more. Like, no more killing. That's enough. Like, stop it."
That's nice.
And so it cuts to the next day, and Heather invites the cops out, including the sheriff from the previous film. And she tells them, like, she's giving up Leatherface, basically. And so they push Leatherface out in this rickety wheelchair. He's got the horrible face, which, by the way, would have been Bill Moseley's face from the Psycho at the beginning, with like wispy strands of gray hair attached. And, he can't speak. He's kind of beaten down. He's just sullen, and they push him away. They've strapped him down, or she strapped him down to the wheelchair, and off he goes. And the cops take him away to the hospital to be treated. Meanwhile, Farnsworth pulls up to actually collect Leatherface and to go put him in the hiding. And it turns out at the hospital, when they remove the mask, it's actually Bert, and his lips have been sewn shut, and he was taped.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and then the script basically ends with Leatherface being spirited away with his chainsaw. He's not happy about it, but he's going to go. And Heather is basically left alone at the Carson family mansion, and it kind of sets up the idea that there's more story to tell, but for the moment that's where it ends. And I hope I've done a decent job synopsizing it, because let me tell you, the script itself is fucking fantastic.
I mean, I was definitely like glued to what you were saying, and I'm someone that doesn't hate the Next Generation, like Texas 4. It's so strange and so weird and kind of camp. And what you were just describing was giving me a little bit of that. Just really unforgivingly bizarre.
I really dig that movie. I think McConaughey is genuinely amazing in it.
Absurd performances all around. And the ending is really weird. It's fucking weird movie.
I really want to know, if we can go to Texas 4, I would love to find out what I need more follow-up. I want to know what's up with the FBI guy with the tribal tattoos.
I know.
Were there hints at UFOs? Like, what the hell is going on there?
I don't know. But what you were just describing to me kind of also giving me a certain unapologetic, bizarre vibe.
Yeah. It was written to be fun, but there's a lot of great character stuff in there too, which obviously I didn't get into, just synopsizing it. But in every way, it bettered its previous installment, and I think really would have steered the franchise back on track. But of course, it didn't get made. Apparently the financiers at that point, they were sort of they were over the Texas Chainsaw 3D of it all. They wanted to go to Bulgaria and shoot on like a $5 million budget, whereas this one would have taken like 15 to make. And what's weird is it was noted that Alexander Daddario and Scott Eastwood, they were under contract for 2 more films.
Oh, really?
So if but they had to be paid a certain amount. So, if they had come up with 15 million to make it, it would have happened. But instead, we got Leatherface, which was the prequel, written by Seth Sherwood, directed by
the Livid team.
Marion Bustillo, which I still love. I think Leatherface is a damn
I've never
good film.
seen it. I've got to watch it because Livid is truly one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, for the life of me, I do not understand why people hate on that movie. I think it's very well written. It does something.
Hate on Livid?
No, on Leatherface.
Oh, on Leatherface, they do. They hate on that.
Yeah, which I don't understand, because it does something fresh and brand new with that world. It's beautifully made. Performances are great. It's a solid flick.
Amazing talent behind it.
Yeah.
So you literally have just provided us with not 1, not 2, but 3 must read chapters within your book. And that's what, 50?
Josh, I gotta ask, what was the third?
Did we did.
Let me rewind. Okay, we did Texas Chainsaw 2. We did Halloran. Oh, I guess I touched a bit on the.
Oh, we did Hellraiser.
Did we though? Did we cover a lot?
We did it. We did it. We did it. And we don't want to give everything away. These MFs need to be buying your book at the link in the show notes because, as I said, these are just fucking 3 topics of, did you say 50?
25.
25. 3 topics of 25. This is just barely scratching the surface. If you've been listening to like over 100 episodes of Development Hell, you obviously need to be buying a copy of this book. I know that I will. I'm wondering, Jinx, what has been the response from fans and the public?
I mean, it seems positive, certainly. People seem to be enjoying it. Just earlier tonight, somebody responded to your tweet, who it turns out is a writer that I know. He wrote a book called The Language of Fear, a short story collection, one of which is called Without You, which inspired the Guns N' Roses music video November Rain.
Cool. This is the guy that said, I love the book?
Yeah, he wrote like great book to your tweet, and I did a double take. I was like, wait, is that Del James? Is that the guy who? I was like, oh well, I'll be damned. That's kind of nice
Cool.
here, so it's kind of giddy at that. So, but yeah, no, people seem to be digging it. And I'll throw out a couple of teasers to listeners out there. In addition to the 2 Hellraisers and the Halloran and Texas Chainsaw, I also cover like an unmade original iteration of Psycho 2. There's a version of Halloween 6. The original iteration of Resident Evil and a third Wishmaster, actually written by the franchise star Andrew Divoff and a man named Russell Kenny.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with the vampire comedy Love at First Bite, there was going to be a early aughts set sequel called Love at Second Bite, which was pitched as My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but with vampires.
Okay, all right.
There was a remake of Race with the Devil written by Drew McWeeny, which was fucking incredible. I remember when it was announced way back in, I want to say 2005 or so, I kind of rolled my eyes at the idea of a remake with Race with the Devil. It's a perfect film. Why remake it? And McWeeny found a way with his writing partner to tell a really timely and sadly still all too timely riff on that story. The creator of Final Destination, Jeffrey Reddick, pitched a version of The Hitcher for its remake that would have been amazing. Kind of transplants it to Florida and makes the killer a little bit younger. And it was a really, really kind of neat, fresh take on that idea rather than just doing more of the same. And I could riff through way more that's in here. There's Jigsaw's Twisted Tales, which was going to be a TV series anthology offshoot of the Saw franchise. A remake of The People Under the Stairs. There is the 3rd installment of Robin Hardy's Wicker Man trilogy, The Wrath of the Gods. A Chopping Mall remake, Silent Night 2, that Santa, Evil Santa movie that everyone wants a sequel to. Well, there are plans for it, if only they would just make it at some point.
Yes, please.
One of my favorite chapters is, a look at Stakeland 3 with Nick D'Amici, the man who wrote and starred in the first 2. There is a pitch for a remake to Castle Freak before the remake that we eventually got from Adam Caesar and Matt Serafini, 2 amazing authors who, had a really cool riff on that original 90s film. And then the book is closed out by a look at Laid to Rest Exhumed, which would have been the 3rd film in the Chrome Skull trilogy. Nick Principi, who played Chrome Skull, is the co-creator of the character. And a great writer in his own right. He sort of goes over what Laid to Rest Exhumed was going to be. A version that he kind of wanted to do after the fact, after sadly kind of the architect for the series, Robert Hall, passed away at the all too young age of 47. And that is discussed a bit in that chapter as well. But, Principi talks about bringing the character into another medium and maybe doing Chrome Skulls a comic. But yes, ultimately there are 25 chapters. It covers, what I think are a lot of amazing projects that sadly, for whatever reason, or for multiple reasons, in fact, that we go over in the book, did not see the light of a projector, which is just deeply unjust. And I hope people dig it. I hope they dig reading about them. And one day, someday, between writing 50 articles for Bloody Disgusting and 25 for this book, I hope that just one of them, if not all of them, I just want one of them to get made someday. I want somebody to
Are you
read about it.
kidding?
And
I feel like every fucking time I make an episode of Development Hell, a week later the project gets announced and I look like an idiot. This happens
I wish that would be the case with my stuff, but
all the time.
so far, not yet, not once.
In fact, we did an episode on Silent Hill 3 that never happened, and we titled the episode The Return of Silent Hill, and that's exactly what the third movie is being called.
I can't wait. I cannot wait for that, by the way.
Oh, I can't wait either. Jinx, what's next? Okay, well, listen, everyone can pick up a copy of the book in the show notes, but where else can people find this book out in the world?
You can find it at encyclopocalypse.com, which I know is just go to Google and do your best, and that'll take you to the site. You know, you can order the paperback, the hardcover, the ebook. There is an audiobook coming up at some point. You can go to Amazon if you so choose. Request it through your local bookstore. You can order it through Books A Million or Barnes & Noble if you would like. Yeah, but just if it finds its way into your midst, give it a look and tweet at me or message me on Instagram. Let me know what you think about it.
Yeah, 100%. With promo code Development Hell, you'll get it half off. No, I'm kidding. I wish. Jinx, what's next for you? What is on the horizon for you creatively?
Hopefully more Phantom Limbs. I am putting together a script for what I hope will be my first feature. I'm trying to get a film off the ground, so please keep your fingers crossed for me.
Yeah,
I do have an idea for another book that's non-Phantom Limbs related that I'm hoping to make happen. It's
nonfiction.
It's something that's kind of itched at me for about a half a decade now, and I hope that I can. It's all it goes back to the Dark Universe book. Whereas that was dependent upon hopefully having like 60 different people to interview. This book will really just require one person, but that one person really needs to say yes to make it happen. So keep your fingers crossed for me on that as well.
I will.
Otherwise, there's all sorts of cool stuff that I want to do with Phantom Limbs, and I'm working on it. So here's hoping.
I love that. I think that's super cool. And I still think that we should find some kind of theater producer so we can put your stage show of I Know What You Did Last Summer in front of audiences where it belongs.
Yeah, one day, someday, we'll make it happen.
I've been begging, but we'll see. Jinx, where can people find you on the internet if you so want to be found?
If you're still on Twitter, you can find me. I'm at Jinx1981. That's JINX1981. If you're not on Twitter anymore, I get it.
Good for you.
I understand. Like, no.
Yeah.
I don't know why I am, truthfully. So
I know.
Yeah, otherwise you can find me on Instagram. That is Jinx740941, and I do apologize for all of the numbers. But find me at either place. Say hey. If you do check out the book, please let me know what you think. And you know what? If you don't want to purchase a copy of the book, request it through your local library. Tell them you want it. Tell them to get it, and check it out that way. But either way, no matter how you check out Phantom Limbs, just give me a yell and please let me know what your favorite chapter was.
You can always steal it from your local bookstore.
Well,
okay, don't steal it. Buy it.
No.
Buy it. In this economy. Jinx, thank you so much for joining me for yet another episode. I know I'm gonna have to have you back in the future. It's just the way that it is. I always appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I always have an absolute blast being on, Josh. May I make a suggestion on air for when I think you and I should talk again?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it was pushed from its original May opening date to, I believe, August. That gives you and I enough time to put together an entire month-long season to coincide with a new installment that's going to reach theaters. And to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the original film, we need to do a month devoted to unmade Crow sequels and remakes.
Oh, that's fascinating. Especially considering the new one is in its own form of development hell right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Let's kind of make it happen. Green lit.
Perfect. All right, I look forward to it.
Yeah, I've never done a Crow episode. I've been dying to, because I know that there was Jason Momoa. There's so much going on in the unmade Crow
Jason Momoa,
universe.
there's the Crow Lazarus, there is the F.
Uh-huh.
Javier Gutierrez remake, there was the action film called I forget what the original title was, but yeah, it was going to be like almost an 80s action like style movie, only it was kind of
Weird.
retrofitted into a Crow sequel that's great. So,
And we have to watch the direct-to-video sequels. It's a must.
oh well, okay, I'm out.
Yeah. What's the third and fourth one called?
Okay, so there's the Crow, the Crow City of Angels. Those were the two theatrical.
Wicked Games.
Salvation, the Crow Wicked Games. I would watch that movie. The Crow Salvation, which was technically theatrical because it was released in the one theater, but really it was straight to DVD. And then the fourth one was called The Crow Wicked Prayer.
Wicked Prayer with our friends. I can do this. Hold on. Edward Furlong and Tara Reid.
Yeah, and David Boreanaz and Macy Gray and Dennis Hopper and Emmanuel Shrieky. Yeah.
Okay, well, we can't do these episodes unless you promise we watch that movie. That's it. That's my only demand.
Josh,
trying to watch it. Also,
Josh, life's short.
I know, and that's why I have to make it so difficult for everyone. The City of Angels or whatever, the Crow 2, that has a killer soundtrack that I still listen to.
Look, is that movie kind of a cut and paste, paint by numbers version story wise of the original film? Yes, it is. But the director behind it, which by the way, they heavily recut that movie too, and I would love to see his director's cut. But you know what? If you just sit back and let that movie wash over you, like just as a mood piece, it is a gorgeous film. Like,
yeah, I'm a fan of it too.
The cinematography, the score by Graham Revell, like the soundtrack, the performances, which can be a little nutty at times. Like that
soundtrack. Yeah,
it works like gangbusters for me. It really does.
It's what it needs to be. Okay, so everyone at home, you can consider this your like teaser trailer for that episode whenever it does drop. Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.